Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and I would like also to warmly welcome each and every participant of this panel, and first of all, our speakers today. And before jumping into the heart of the matter, what is a kind of food for thought for this panel is a keynote speech, which will be delivered by Ueberschär, who is the chair of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, the German Green Party's political foundation. So Ellen, I would like to ask you to give us your keynote speech, and then we will continue a video message from Commissioner Sinkevicius, the European Commissioner for Environment, and then followed by the contributions of the panelists. So Ellen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benedek. A warm welcome also from my side to all participants, to the mayors who convene now, we know it, and panel guests to the Budapest Forum. I'm honored to have that we as a foundation have the unique opportunity to support this event and to kick off the debate about climate and people, about climate crisis, combating, and communities. The need for an ambitious climate agenda, this was highlighted also from Mr. Carbaton and others. The need for an ambitious climate agenda happens in a time of crisis. We find ourselves amidst the climate crisis, whose immediate devastating consequences for our lives and the environment are already showing. It's nothing that is ahead of us, but which is already there. The floods in Western Europe or the devastating fires in Southern Europe appear to be more than the writing on the wall. Amidst the climate crisis, government and societies and the European Union try to get a grip on the COVID crisis. Our societies are being weakened by the economic downturn due to the pandemic, exacerbating, of course, also social inequalities. And we observe a continuous backsliding of democracies in Europe, and not only here. What lessons do we learn from this accumulation of climate crisis, democratic crisis, and health crisis? One major lesson we have learned from the pandemic, and I think the mayors in the first panel have highlighted this: crises do not exist in a vacuum, and we need to map their linkages. The spread and mortality of COVID-19 were increased by the degree of air pollution that had already left health and social vulnerabilities. The more, climate change has exacerbated the inequalities for marginalized groups that have already faced sexism, racism, or other forms of social injustice. In many cases, it is the vulnerable groups of our society who carry the main burden of the changing climate. Authoritarian governments have used their chance to further infringe democratic rights and the rights of institutions like parliaments in the course of tackling the pandemic. Right populist groups capture the issue of climate change to counter science and the international community with nationalistic and isolationist responses. Yet, crisis can be used as a momentum for real change. I mean, I do not speak about revolution, but about the fact that the crisis can spark structural transformation and make our societies more resilient. Civil society, people who care, play a major role. But the prerequisite of those resilient and democratic societies is a liberal democracy and not an illiberal one that undermines the fundamental rights and the human dignity pretending to combat the pandemic or the climate crisis. Soon after COVID occurred, a debate evolved whether tough measures and bans could be a role model to tackle the climate crisis. To make it absolutely clear, we will not succeed to overcome any global crisis through dictatorship and authoritarian measures. Freedom of press, freedom of expression, freedom of science are the prerequisites for a sustainable solution of the climate crisis and other crises. And let me add, for sure, we need to build strong democratic and progressive alliances on political and administrative levels, especially among communities and the local level, where the immediate process of change of a social and ecological transformation takes place. At the same time, we have to convince majorities in our European societies, make them part of the solution, show them respect and recognition. This is the only way to prevent citizens from following right-wing authoritarian ideas, falling prey to conspiracy theories, or emigrating in frustration. Democracy needs strong and committed citizens. I would like to bring three major theses into the discussion. First, climate protection for all generations is a democratic and a social matter. The fact that preserving the livelihood of citizens is a democratic issue and protecting the climate is necessary to protect civil liberty rights by law was highlighted by a verdict of the German Constitutional Court in April 21, and this verdict came after ruling of the Dutch Supreme Court in a similar case. Climate protection, that's the main message of the courts, climate protection is a human right. And environmental and economic transformation has to go hand in hand with social transformation that takes all people into account equally, regardless of their age, their origin, or their social position. The young generations have called for an immediate reaction to the climate crisis, we know it, Fridays for Future and so on, to protect their upcoming generations. This also makes clear climate protection is a generational project. If we seek to guarantee liberty to our children and the next generations, it is imperative to not only stabilize, but to improve the living conditions for the generations and the citizens now and those to come, in urban and in rural areas, for workers, in trade, factories, agriculture, for students and the elderly alike. Transformation can only lead to success stories with the necessary political backbone of a society that has its own take and its own interest in bringing forward a real social and ecological transformation. Second, a participative, green and equitable renewal is key to preserving the liberty and the dignity of people and societies. What does liberty mean in the context of an ecological renewal? Protecting and strengthening freedom in Europe is to make sure that all citizens have the means and the opportunities to decide freely in future. None of us wants to see governmental bodies using emergency laws to determine access to water, to clean air, or permanently limiting mobility options. Governmental regulations on environmental protections, whether it be regulation on carbon emissions, on traffic or consumption, are often regarded as restrictive measures to liberty today. The main question, however, is what if today's liberty to consume freely will bring severe restrictions to the liberty of the next generation in terms of their living conditions and living space? Preserving the livelihood of our society is hence core to protecting the dignity of all citizens. To use a moment of crisis for real change, it is necessary to now assume responsibility and lay the groundwork for an ambitious recovery from the pandemic. The European Green Deal and the recovery program of the European Union is a great start, and it needs to have a consequent strategic orientation of its investments based on environmental and social criteria that the latter one has to develop. By the way, municipalities need direct access to European structural funding because it is the municipal level which is decisive for social and economic cohesion and environmental protection, integration and inclusion. Third point, citizens and civil society have to be involved in shaping the Green Deal. Communities, local initiatives, civil societies are placed exactly where transformation happens and hence present important drivers of environmental, social, and economic renewal. The European Green Deal will become a success story only if it is established with a broad alliance of civil society, economy, science, trade unions that has their say in how to shape a sustainable and green renewal. Responsive city councils and mayors are needed, trustworthy decision makers beyond any corruption, but instead with a vision of a fair and just municipality. There are already many local success stories happening all over Europe and beyond that serve for a great basis to create synergies, learn from each other, and foster political and environmental partnerships. Involving community actors, climate activists, or establishing Citizens' Council are only a few examples on how governments have systematically involved civil society in the political process. In the end, shaping transformation together with the people will strengthen and enrich our democracies as well. I would like to end here, and I'm looking forward to your perspectives on the panel and, of course, to this fruitful discussion we will have, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. And now a video message from Commissioner Sinkevicius will be, I hope, will be.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Mayor Coraccioni, for this invitation, and to all the partners of this event for giving me this opportunity. I regret I am unable to be present live and participate to this very important discussion on the power of people in front of the climate crisis. When you look at the scale of the challenges ahead, we understand the need to get everyone on board. The need to make sure the transition is just and fair for everyone. They need to make sure people, organizations, communities feel empowered to act. That makes events like this extremely important. The challenges can be felt every day more clearly. Not just the recovery from COVID, but reducing emissions to reach carbon neutrality by the middle of the century, halting and reversing biodiversity loss, moving to a restorative and circular economy, and a world where pollution is a thing of the past. Thanks to the mobilizing power of the young generation, Europe is answering head-on to these planetary emergencies. The European Green Deal was adopted early in the mandate, and its components are nearly all in place. We have a climate law and the Fit for 55 proposals for accelerating the transition in all sectors by 2030. We have a circular economy action plan, a biodiversity strategy for 2030, and a zero pollution action plan. As scientists have been further ringing the alarm bell this summer, we need to accelerate the implementation. This requires significant investments, new ways of producing and consuming, research and innovation, and changes in the way we live, we use transport and work. It requires mobilizing governments, the financial sector, businesses, the public sector, and professionals from all horizons. It requires involvement of local and regional authorities, communities, associations, and NGOs, because ultimately change will be brought by the people that engage wherever they are. And to be successful, policies and solutions need to be planned, designed, and rolled out with people in mind, and especially the most vulnerable. This is why we have taken seriously the concerns for social fairness in our climate legislative proposals and taken care to design them in an inclusive and socially conscious way. A few examples. The Energy Efficiency Directive includes obligation to achieve energy savings among energy poor and vulnerable households. The Energy Taxation Directive offers exemptions for vulnerable households. Furthermore, the Social Climate Fund will support member states to mitigate the costs to the most exposed to the increase in fossil fuel prices, because tackling energy poverty will be a must for ensuring a just transition and bring the power of the people on board. People and organizations are not just the recipient of EU policies and programs designed in Brussels or in the national capitals. They can also get involved in the EU Climate Pact to connect, share knowledge, develop, implement, and scale up solutions for climate change. The pact covers much more than climate. It's also there for biodiversity, pollution, and circular economy. People can also join in citizen science. Protecting and restoring ecosystems, for example, takes information from volunteers who count birds or butterflies, seals, or litter on the beach. People can also take part in the Conference on the Future of Europe, a major new forum for open debate. It's transparent, it's inclusive, and it's gathering citizens' views on European challenges and priorities. Our goal is to take Europe out of the capitals and to reach every corner of the Union and to give back a sense of control. So we listen to citizens and we listen to cities as well. Urban areas play a vital role in improving air, water, and noise pollution, in enhancing biodiversity protection, and in transitioning away from the inefficient patterns of growth. European support takes many forms, including awards and programs that help cities face these challenges and become cleaner, greener, and healthier places to live. The Green City Accord, launched in October 2020 to encourage more intensive action to improve the urban environment. More than 60 cities are already taking part, and we hope for many more. Like today's event, it's all about partnership, democracy, and participation. And it's also about fairness, responsibility, and solidarity. Best wishes for a fruitful discussion today and a successful event. Thank you.
So thank you for Commissioner Sinkevicius. And now, after these two valuable keynote speeches and contributions, it's time to introduce the panel which we have today. So besides our fellow Ueberschär, who was already presented and who gave the keynote speech, co-president of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung in Berlin, also head of the scholarship program of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. We have in this panel Sergey Lagodinsky, member of the European Parliament for almost 3 years now. Am I right? It's a long time, yeah. Who is member of the Libe Committee and mostly responsible for rule of law issues in the Green Group of the European Parliament. Unfortunately, Leonore Gewessler, Federal Minister for Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation and Technology in Austria, had to decline her participation due to health issues. She deeply apologizes for this. But we have Ada Ámon, who is Chief Advisor to the Mayor of Budapest and Head of Unit of the Climate and Environment at the Budapest City Hall. And last but not least, of course, we have Amandine Roggeman, who is representing the Citizens' Convention for the Climate in France, which is an excellent example of public participation and citizens' engagement in climate policy making. So we listened to many very interesting ideas and inputs from in the keynote speeches. And first I would like to, well, in a way to go from the higher level to the local level, from the European level through the citizens or the cities level to the citizens level. So first I would like to turn to Sergey, to you, and originally my questions were about how rule of law and democracy is related to the performance of climate policy making in the EU and in the member states, and what is the link between the two issues. But after having the keynote speeches, and only if you wish, I also would be interested in your views if, as Commissioner Sinkevicius mentioned, that there are many, and also Ellen, you pointed out, that there are many European initiatives. We have quite an ambitious European climate policy now, which is much more ambitious than just a few years ago. We have the European Green Deal, we have the Fit for 55 package, the climate law, and also there are some social aspects taken into consideration in the European climate policy making. But how do you see, is it ambitious enough what the EU is doing on the climate side and also on the social aspects of the climate policy making? Is it really offering a solution? Is it really a flagship of the international climate efforts, or how do you see how the Greens are regarding this in the European Parliament? Sergey, please.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and thanks for this wonderful conference. This is exactly what we need. We need to get together and talk about democracy issues in a safe space, and also to talk about, in this room, and also to talk about how democracy is not just an end in itself, but also an asset for other issues like this issue, environmental issues and the environmental agenda. Just to address briefly what you mentioned, I do think that the European Union, and we have to acknowledge that, this Commission under Ursula von der Leyen, and we can be critical of some aspects of it, etc., but the trajectory and the direction that this Commission has taken, also upon pressure coming from initiatives like yours and from the citizens, by the way, speaking of democracy, they have reacted, and I do think that it is important to acknowledge that the direction is right, and that we have the greenest, so far, the greenest Commission. Not just because we saw a green commissioner, but also in terms of content. The problem is, and these are the problems that we have also nationally in so many countries, is that we don't have much time. And the problem is the ambition. So when we look at those plans, the two questions that I personally have, and many of us have, is this ambitious enough to be on time? Because, as you know, and I don't have to elaborate on this panel at least, the Paris targets, Paris Agreement targets, even in Germany, we probably are going to be missing them. And if the future government is not going to be green enough, we will be missing them for sure. Sorry, I don't want to do an electoral campaign here, but we are just a week away from a very important decision there. But also in your country and in the Czech Republic, so we have a very dense democratic months ahead of us. So I would say the 2 points or the 3 points maybe are the following. Number one, we need to be more ambitious. We need to raise the standards and the targets higher and faster than they are, because otherwise we will be having problems for future generation, or maybe even for this generation. When we see this summer, we already sense it. Number two, the issue of implementation. We just saw the State of the Union address of Ms. von der Leyen, and she can talk nicely. And I don't want to touch upon the rule of law issues that she mentioned yesterday, but also on the green environmental issues and policies. This was a very nice, moving speech, very poetic, but the question is what about implementation? And is she capable of implementing it against council members, against member states, who of course have a slightly different view for national and political reasons? So this is number two, and there I think we should support the Commission in pushing this agenda into national governments and forcing them to come with us. Number three, what we are missing very often now is the right calibration of those standards. We often agree now about maybe the level of ambition. We can still adjust, but we agree that we want to achieve something. We want to impose higher CO2 prices, etc., etc. I think it is time now to see and ask the Commission, and for that we need not just the green, but also a left-leaning perspective on that. Can we calibrate the burdens in a way that they would not blow into our face, because the voters will say, I'm very sorry, but I have to feed my kids. And this is something that we are addressing in our proposal. So more investing, of course we should, for example, the money that will be coming from trading the certificates. The Commission wants to put it into an innovation fund, and me doing digital policy as well, I'm very happy to hear about that. We need it for artificial intelligence, etc., etc. But we want it to be a social policy fund. And when we're talking about the German discussion, this government, which is not even green, is increasing the prices for energy, but it does not think about how to balance out the burdens for those who are socially poor. And the Greens now play the role that actually nobody would have expected it, at least in Germany, in a kind of stereotypical way. The Greens want only, raise the energy prices. No, we want to redistribute the revenues that we're getting there, but we will redistribute them depending on the income. People like myself who have a good income should not get back from the government. But people who have kids and earn less money need to be reimbursed partly, or depending on their income. And I think this is something that this Commission is not, where this Commission is not there yet. And when we look at the Just Transition Fund, and of course when we look at the agricultural policy, which is the biggest problem that we're having, and the policy in terms of transportation, these are the two issues where we still have to adjust and improve, because if we do not rebuild and restructure our policies in the agricultural area, you can forget about the rest. So these are the points that I would say, more ambition, more calibration of burdens, and more focus on real enforcement, also vis-à-vis member states, I think that are important. I know that there are other people, maybe I can briefly just say about rule of law or about democracy issues. I have many more points there to make, but I don't want to make too much of your time. I think that this combination, as Ellen also mentioned, is a key, because it brings together two issues. I usually say we have three issues that we're facing in the European Union, which will be crucial in the upcoming 2 or 3 years. And if we don't manage them, the European Union will implode. And these issues are: how do we address climate change? How do we address rule of law? And how do we address the issue of ability to act on foreign policy? We're talking about two of them, but I wanted to add the foreign policy issue to what Ellen said. The problem with, let's say, authoritarian regimes, or our very kind of 19th century understanding of democracy, is that it gives us incentives, or it gives the rulers incentives to extract fast and very exhaustive rent, doing the rent seeking, by externalizing costs. And how do we externalize? We don't externalize towards our voters, of course not. We need their votes. We externalize in terms of the future generation, as Ellen mentioned, but we also externalize in terms of people who do not live in our country. We externalize and do not count in the consequences that sometimes are already there. It's not even the future generation. For those in the south, people living under different conditions and different climate, or even around the corner on the other side of the border, who we do not depend on. So I think what was interesting about the Constitutional Court and the Danish, I think, right? Or Dutch? Netherlands. Dutch court before, is that the climate crisis is forcing us to rethink the issue of how we define our polis, of how do we define who legitimizes our power and whom we owe accountability. by broadening it in terms of time and broadening it in terms of geography. And that we should maybe discuss later in the discussion here.
Thank you, and I'm already full of questions, but really we would like to move ahead, but perhaps we can come back to those issues in the discussion part, broadening in time and geography, but also we can raise the issue of broadening in terms of species. What about the non-human beings globally, and so on and so forth. And also you mentioned that we should lean to the left a little bit, but we are happy to see that the green claims are already adopted by the European Commission, and emphasizing more and pushing strongly the leftist claims perhaps could create a political resistance against also the environmental, the climate results we already have. So it's a different issue, but let's come back to those during the discussion part. And now I would like to move to other Ámon, that from a city perspective, how these questions look like. And we know that in Europe, more than 70% of the population lives in cities, and at least the same share of CO2 emission is produced by the cities. So the cities have a pivotal role in any kind of joint European, common European climate policy. But what are the prerequisites, the conditions of cities to perform well, to effectively contribute to the European climate efforts and climate actions? And on the other hand, as we were talking about the social aspect, it's a bit tricky for cities, as the lion's share of social policy making is in the hands of the national governments, or in the land in Germany or in some other countries, but very rarely they are in the hands of the local government. So how to couple on the local level the climate action with the social action? How can we make the green transition as just and as fair as possible? What are the experiences here in Budapest?
Well, so far we have a 2-year experience, so it's not such a kind of, the length of it wouldn't allow us to use it as an experience, really. But as you said, Benedek, really, from a mitigation point of view, the cities are in the core of the actions, as most of the buildings and the habit, how to say, the people who are inhabiting countries are moving towards cities. So there is a stable energy demand which is in the cities, which needs to be mitigated in order to make sure that the mitigation targets are achieved. But on the other hand, the adaptation challenge is also in the cities, as most of the effect of climate change are much more severe in cities. Therefore, all the adaptation costs, or the lion's share of the adaptation cost, which affecting people, are somehow placed in the cities. So cities have a double role in this sense, and the third role is to convince people to live with these new measures and actions. And as it has been already mentioned, we are not fast enough. And just to, from my own frustration to share some, one of the first action and measures were in the city hall to declare climate emergency in Budapest as well. And since then, unfortunately, we have also the work and the task to convince our own colleagues to be fast on that issue, And as you see, governments are usually very slow in action, and this is one of our biggest frustration at the moment, probably. So this is, therefore, the city's role, and as it has been also mentioned, we will be in the forefront of actually doing the work. We will have the most power in terms of mitigating CO2 emission from the sources, from the biggest CO2 emitters, basically people who are using their own flats and houses very ineffectively and inefficiently. Therefore, yes, the direct access to funding would be inevitable to make sure that we will be using purposefully this amount of money, which is coming from the European funds, also from the new generation in European funds. And at the moment, we don't have any access to those financial sources, which is really the second factor of frustration, I guess, in Budapest. But in terms of democracy, we are in a good kind of ranking, I'm sure. The Budapest City Hall has been, ever since there is a new leadership, using these measures and using these tools to engage with the citizens. And we had our first citizens' assembly on how to tackle climate change in the city, in Budapest, which has been a very, very supportive and reinforcing event, as we could see that really citizens, if they are informed enough and if they have access to the information which is essential for making an informed decision, they can accept and understand and live with all those difficult and probably sometimes restrictive measures, and they would propose it even to the City Hall to implement those, and they would hopefully held us accountable to do so. So in this sense, the common sense and the public wisdom was there, and we could use it in our own climate strategy, which has been already adapted since then. But what I'm trying to show here is there is a gap between the ambition of cities, also in Hungary. I mean, cities are quite ambitious in terms of mitigating and also adapting to the changing environment, whilst the government is really reluctant to support these actions. And on the other hand, and this is a question to the European level, so to say, how the Central Eastern European countries and the governments are pulling back the ambition, what should be in place on the European level. And this is, I think, is an important issue, that the government is holding us back in terms of doing our work and supporting us with the financial means to do so. And at the same time, they are doing the same thing on the European level and blaming the European Union, forcing us to do something what the Hungarian people wouldn't like to do, which is not true, actually. Hungarian people would like to see climate measures on all levels, national, city level, and even lower level. And just to go back to the question, how can we do that if there is no financial means? How can we do that if the legislative framework regarding climate and environmental issues are tying our hands, and we don't have the power in the logic of the subsidiarity principle to do some of the measures and to implement those regulative actions what would be needed in order to ban the incoming cars or trying to squeeze out the highly polluting vehicles and replace old furnaces in houses of poor people when we don't have the money for that. So yeah, probably we can also talk about these different levels and the imperative of climate change at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ada. And the first two speakers talk a lot about social fairness of the green transition, which is very important, of course. Ada already started to speak about not simply to make the climate transition socially just and fair, but to involve the people in decision making. And I think that that's really one of the big questions, how to make the government not simply for the people, but of the people and by the people. So how can we make the different level of governance more open to the involvement of the citizens, and what is the role of the citizens in decision making, and especially in climate and environmental decision making, and how can we make the participation, the involvement of the citizens stronger on the local, on the national and the European level, keeping in mind the coming COP26 in Glasgow, which is in November, how the citizens, the people can contribute to the global climate diplomacy and global climate decision making. And Amandine, who represents the French Citizens Citizens Convention for the climate, you have important experiences. But I'm not sure that everybody is really very well informed and experienced regarding the French Convention for the Climate, Citizens Convention for the Climate. So if you could a little bit introduce us that why this procedure, this whole story was created or initiated, and what are the experiences of the active participation of the people in the national climate decision making.
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's my first time in Budapest, thanks to you, so I'm really happy to be there, and it's a concrete example of how citizens can contribute to this big dialogue and transition being there with you today, I think. So to sum up a bit about the French Citizens Convention on Climate and what is it, who were its members, how does it started? I would say you said earlier you have to go faster and higher, and I completely understand this ambition, but this is exactly why the convention happened in France, because our government wanted maybe to go too fast and too high on some climate policies that the people were not ready to understand. And so this was actually the Yellow Jacket protest, so you might have heard of that. It was in 2018 in France. So the whole country was paralyzed, actually. That was quite a mess. And there were weekly demonstrations of people from all around the country, mostly rural areas, actually, and people from the countryside. And they were claiming for better standards of living. And they were, what was actually the trigger factor of that was that the French government wanted to implement a new tax on fuel. And the idea of this tax was to reduce greenhouse gas emission of people and to be in the trajectory of the Paris Agreement that you just mentioned before. But I think they didn't take time to explain this aim to the people and this global framework. And so this was only perceived as, one more tax in your everyday life. And how are you gonna end up paying your rent at the end of the month? You were saying like feeding your kids. This is exactly that. The people that were in the street at the time were asking this themselves, how can I be in this climate transition, which I don't really believe in, or I even don't think climate crisis is real. So you have people that still believe that. And my priority is to feed my family, pay my rent, and all that. So it was really like I think it's the best illustration of what you both said previously. And I think that the government understand that they couldn't implement a climate agenda without involving the citizens after this event. And so there was a first attempt to organize a big consultation in France that was called the Great National Debate. So this was beginning of 2019. And all the country was invited to provide ideas about what to implement in their way of life. You had like big thematics that people would react on. And the problem of that first initiative was that there was no follow-up. Many people had been coming to public meetings and they had been like putting ideas in registers of grievance that were after supposed to inspire the government for measures, and nothing was really made of that, or nobody knew what happened to all this work and all this material, and this democratic material actually. And so the Citizens' Convention for Climate was born after that, knowing that you had to have a very clear goal and a very clear commitment from the political side, saying what you're going to do about the work. And so this commitment was really at the core of the Citizens' Convention in France. It's when President Macron said, I'm going to take and consider all the proposals that you will have without filters. So that was the big thing in France, the without filters. What does it mean exactly? Where are the filters? Are there any filters in the end? And so this is a statement for which I think is a bit reproached today because he didn't fulfill completely his commitment on that point. So that is, I mean, the history of the French Convention, and maybe in a few words, what is it concretely? It's in summer 2019, 150 citizens were chosen at random according to some criteria in order to form a representative panel of the French society. Among those criteria, to give you an idea, were gender, age, level of education, socio-professional category, geographical area, and type of residency. And so I was one of them. I was chosen really at random. One day I just got a text message saying, like, do you want to be part of this? And I'm like, I don't know. What is it? Is it really involving? And it really changed the life of the people that were part of that, really. And I think nobody really thought about the impact also in your personal life. And so I would learn later that my phone number had been generated automatically. So it's really the way it was done. And I didn't like subscribe to something in the first place or what, because people often ask and they say it's not possible, but yes, it is. And the mandate of the convention in France was the following one: to define a series of measures allowing to achieve a reduction of at least 40% in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, compared to 1990, in a spirit of social justice. Because the idea was exactly to do a step back. Like, and learning from the mistakes of the yellow jackets and the tax fuel and etc. So to really have on the same mandate climate ambition and social justice at the same time. So that was, and even if today the 40% is a bit like past, I mean, like we were discussing about 55%, and we were still working on the 40% mandate. So, so during months, we gathered together with the 149 other citizens, learned from experts and different stakeholders about climate issues. We were divided in 5 main groups that were consuming, inhabiting, eating, producing, and moving. We ended up working on a final report of 149 proposals that were all submitted to our president, Macron, and his government in June 2020, so 1 year ago approximately. And most of the proposal at the time, we were asked, with the help, of course, of lawyers, because we didn't have the exact ability to do it, to translate our proposals in legal terms. So that would help actually the government or the deputies and to political leaders to work on this material and to make a real law proposal out of it. So we gave back that we gave that work, and 1 year later we voted in France this summer a law that is called Climate and Resilience, and the law is mostly inspired of the work that we have produced, but it's still like some people are still a bit critical about it, and I have to say so because I'm there like to encourage also other countries and other cities to have, I think, similar initiatives, because there is still a lot to experience and to improve in citizens' participation. But the French experience was, yes, the end was a bit, I mean, not as ambitious as it should have been, I guess. The law proposal is not taking all the measures and all the proposals that we have done, so the filters are here in the end. And also, I think it's some other proposals were slightly changed, deadline for entry into force, or you know, the carbon gram per liter for the vehicles was higher than what we would have expected, or, you know, those kind of small indicators that make you see that the ambition is not exactly the one you wanted in the first place. But in the end, it's still, for me, I think the first law in France that it directly comes from the citizens, and not only from the ministers or the deputies and parliaments. It's really the first time I think we have a law project. So I think it's a great success in that way to first have something concrete that we succeeded to do together, because after giving the proposal to the government, we went into discussing with the different parliaments in France also, and I haven't made that in my life before, so, you know, it was a real big experiment, and also on a human point of view. I mean, I think every citizen deserves to live something like that and to really experiment what is it to be a citizen. We have many people in the end of this process that understood that they had a part to take in this big society, you know, and they went for political elections, on a local elections, and they were not at all engaged, or I mean, they were not in politics before. So I think it's a great example of also how to give back confidence to the people in their political system. Because in France today, I don't know what's the situation here, but in France, you have like massive abstention to every election, even national or locals. So I don't even speak about the European ones, which are like, I think, it's far for the people, the normal people, it's far. Like, so I think it's really important on this point of view to involve more and more citizens.
Thank you very much. And now I would open the panel for reactions to each other, but of course I have questions as well. You may decide if you want to react on what we've heard from other speakers or answering to my questions. But I have a few questions, and the first, perhaps, Alan, for you, that we were speaking about that. Well, we had a cross-cutting approach of climate issues from the European level till the citizens' level, perhaps a little bit less about the national level. And Germany is really a flagship of climate action in Europe. Partly because it's regarded as one of the front runners of climate actions. On the other hand, also the criticism are there regarding the German climate policies, the Energiewende, saying that exactly the social aspects were not taken into considerations on the proper level, and perhaps the high, which Sergey, you mentioned, that the high energy prices in Germany might be the consequences of the transition, partly the nuclear phase out, partly the investment in renewables. But how do you see the German experience, and keeping in mind all what we've heard about the public participation and citizens' engagement, that how this happened in Germany, and what could be the lessons to learn for other countries, how to make or how not to make the climate and energy transition.
Benedek, thank you for this impression. Our impression is a bit different because we used to be the forerunners, yes, with this energy law and so on, with this legislation which was released by the red-green government 15 years or so ago. And since then we have fallen behind, also behind other European countries, and that's really the problem. And it's always disappointing when I don't know, was it last year or the year before, the first climate package came out. I was listening to ordinary people in the Berlin S-Bahn, and they were really disappointed. Those were teachers, and they were visiting Berlin with their cousin. They were really they didn't know what to say, because we saw massive lots of people, of young the complete young generation on the street, and all what was done was such a little. Yeah. So then the verdict came in April, and that was, of course, a boost to the ground. So the ruling government was again forced to improve the climate package they had already made, and then they said, oh yeah, the Social Democrats, it's their fault, and the Social Democrats, no, it's your fault, and so on and on. And what we see is, in this national election, climate is on the forefront of the topics that are important for the people. And I would say that's for the first time. I mean, people in Germany, they are aware, they have the awareness of environmental issues. That's a historical issue, which would be to take too long to explain. But the awareness has always been high. But in the end, if you go to the cabin and to vote, you vote for your pension or for housing prices or whatever. But this time it's different, and that's why each and every party in Germany at the moment in the election campaign is talking about climate policy. So this is really, it's a top topic. And the problem is what Sergey was referring to. how ambitious is what the parties suggest, how serious is it meant, and will they go on if they come to the government? So that's, but on the other hand, I would say the leader of the Green Party always says, okay, we want to compete. We don't want to be the only one to bring forward the climate issue. That was the point you were referring to. Is combating climate change a left or a right-wing issue? I would say it's an issue of all of us, and that's why it's a good idea to have competition from different party families of ideas to combat the climate crisis. And I mean, there is an effect, a kind of second-hand effect about the national climate policy in Germany. The more ambitious it is, the more ambitious Germany is on a European level. And for the last year, we have seen that the German government has hindered and has always tried to roll back a bit the ambitious ideas of the Commission and of the Parliament, especially. And that's why it's so decisive what kind of government Germany will see next year. This will have a heavy influence on the European Council and what can happen there.
Well, I'm tempted to ask what color of government in Germany we'll have, but of course nobody knows that at this point. But Sergey, coming back to the issue which you started to explain, but perhaps you didn't have the time to conclude. This is the link between, and also I think that Ada was mentioning that it might be just because of or by chance, but we see some parallel issues when it comes to autocratic tendencies and low level of climate ambition. So just not to be so mysterious, when we talk about Hungary or Poland, we see that the illiberal tendencies are coupled with a very low climate ambition and with basically blocking the EU to become more ambitious. Keeping in mind that, yes, I have the experience that sometimes the German government can be one of the blockers as well. But still, there is some link between those autocratic illiberal tendencies and the low level of climate ambition. How do you see that? What could be the reason behind this? Just by chance? There are some historical explanations behind, or it's a systemic institutional effect which generates triggers or link one to other.
Well, we tried to find some kind of academic proof for the link. What we found now was the correlation between the level of free press and clean environment. But that was it. I think it's not so much a matter of correlations or causalities from the academic perspective, but I think it's a matter of kind of the evidence that we see. And the point is, and there I'm torn regarding this direct participation and what forms of direct participation we want to see. I think that the right answer and the most productive kind of democracy type, green democracy type, is a clever combination between direct democracy elements and representative democracy. Because if we only go in one direction and talk about direct democracy, we are going, or there is a risk of going onto a very populist kind of path. And on the other hand, if we only have parties, then there is no acceptance on behalf of the citizens. So I think, for example, the proposal of the Greens, sorry, I'm Green, I have to do this. So the proposal of Greens of the so-called councils of citizens, I think is a very interesting proposal, where you have a systematic way of involving, direct involvement of people randomly, so probably what you experienced, and we see how positive this could be. But I do think that we should not lose sight of the fact that that the liberal democracies, with issues of empowering civil society as it is, not just as a substitute for parties and parliaments, but civil society's transparency, free press, without which we would not discover the corruption issues, and corruption is a motor of environmentally damaging processes, because, as I mentioned, it's easy to exhaust and to squeeze out environment and into your own pocket. So those elements, the elements that are at threat in countries like this, or in a country like Poland, I'm very sorry to say this, or in Slovenia, which I visited a couple of months ago, these are all elements that are safeguards into looking into green responsibility, green accountability, inventing new concepts like the free courts and independent courts, who don't look at the government but correct the government, and by doing so, doing the exercise of developing the concept of democracy, as we have seen here. And one more point, I think, which is interesting when we talk about both rule of law issues that we're facing now and environmental issues that we're facing now. When both of those issues, with them becoming more and more important, we are departing from the usual dichotomy of left and right. And I think this is something that is very disorienting, but maybe these are the new orientation and the new compass that we could use. Because, as Ellen mentioned, it's not a given that the left-leaning forces are more ambitious and the right-leaning forces are less ambitious. And it's not a given that the left-leaning forces are more democratic in terms of, liberal democracy, and the right-wing. So we are, it's probably the sign of our times that we are kind of departing those dichotomies of the 19th century, 18th century, and going into totally new democracy understanding and political understanding, and that could explain also the decay, not now in Germany, but the decay of social democrats in Europe. Well, now in Germany is a totally different case, because it's not about social democracy. It's not about content of social democracy, and also the decay of conservatism that we are seeing now in Germany, and the hopeful kind of trajectory of the Greens, who kind of bridge those issues, especially if you look at them in Germany with the two wings, the Realos and the left, and actually you want to get into the center and to leave behind those fights. So I think this is also an interesting sign of development of our democracy through environmental challenges, that it is just a different framework. And because I don't want to, again, to monopolize the panel, I will not discuss the issue of Eastern Europe and environmental and climate issues, and why we're still lagging behind in our discussions on that. I think there is at least if I look, because I also deal with former Soviet Union and Poland, I do think that there is still kind of a post-socialist and post-Soviet strange way of not wanting to deal with those issues, just as the issue of diversity. But that, we need an extra panel on that, maybe with historians, to talk about this.
Next year we will have that panel as well. But now I would like to ask Amandine that you mentioned that the process brought you to contribute to the Climate and Resilience Act in France. Still, I have two questions regarding that, because, as you mentioned, finally the law was not as ambitious as it should have been. So it's still about the 40%. So we had the complete public participation, and this didn't lead us to a really ambitious climate law. How do you see that? Why this happened in this democratic procedure, or what were the elements of, or what limited the convention not to become more ambitious on the one hand? On the other hand, and I'm happy that you mentioned the case of the Gilets jaunes movement, because I think it's really a textbook example how not to introduce environmental measures. Is there a difference? So the Climate and Resilience Act, what was the public perception of this new law? So there was more support from the society. It was widely acknowledged and accepted. Just the opposite way as it happened with the fuel tax, which was the triggering issue for the Gilets jaunes movement.
Thank you. I think the Climate Resilience Act was less controversial than the fuel tax. I don't know if it's because of its lack of ambition or because of the citizens getting into the process. In the end, I think it's what limited this project is, like in every law project or politic situation, everybody is waiting for the other one to do the first step. And this is what I've observed, because when we gave back our report to the President Macron, he said, okay, you've done a great job, so I'm gonna ask you now to come at the table with the ministers, with the companies, and with all the stakeholders that are going to work on the writing of the law. And this was not supposed to happen like that. We were just supposed to give back the report and go back to our lives. So we had this step, this supplementary, this one more step that was really like getting us into the complexity of policy making, which is really precious and interesting when you're a citizen coming from not this world. And so we were facing people like big companies or what, saying, we want to do this, we want to move forward, but we are waiting for the public regulations on this subject. And when you ask the politicians and the government, they're saying, of course we are going to do the regulations, but we wait for the companies and the economic key players to be I don't know, to move forward first. And we had like this debate that I was pretty involved in. It was the regulation on advertising, which was one of the proposals of the convention. It came up from the consuming thematic group, because citizens were asking themselves, why should we still have to listen to all this advertising about products that sometimes are not even good for the environment? And can we start by educating people through this way? And also, regulating advertising was a way to put more pressure on the producers of those goods that are not good for the environment. I mean, cars or whatever. Cars were the most relevant example in this debate. And when we faced the company that were involved in it, or the publicists, they all said, of course we want to do that, but we are waiting for the consumer to move on, and we'll follow the consumer's trend. And so it's always like that. Everybody is talking about, and we've ended up with this law project facing that, and I think there was kind of a inertia in this, and that's why now we are putting a lot of hope in Europe, I have to admit, and so we've created an organization called the 150, and there are different groups of work, and I'm in charge of the one with the European Union and international scale, in order to really say, you have to do at this level more, citizens' assembly or whatever forms they take. And you also have to consider some of our proposals that were directly targeting the European legislation. And so this is a big step for us, and we hope to be part of the conference on the future of Europe, because this is directly addressing citizens, indeed. And also we have a lot of expectations on the French presidency of the European Union that will be coming next semester, and we are trying to discuss with our government of what will be the ambition of the country at this time. So I think, yes, we are putting all our hopes towards Europe. I don't know if it's the right solution, but it's the only one left, so a lot of pressure. But I think, yeah, it's good also to find ways to have more dialogue between European Union institutions and citizens. This is still really hard to build, and I've been addressing that with President of the European Union Parliament, and we were very enthusiastic, both of us, but nobody had the solution on how to do it concretely. And that's the thing. So I think there is something to dig in and just maybe also help the different citizens that have been in those processes all around Europe to meet together and share the experience. That would be a first step, I guess. And so, yeah, this is what I would like to raise.
When it comes to influencing European climate decision making, of course, besides of the citizens, there are the cities. And my question is regarding the potential of citizens alliances and cities alliances and cities themselves to directly participate in European or global climate decision making. We know that in the Central and Eastern European region, the big cities are much more ambitious from a climate perspective than the national governments. Is it an alternative to the national governments? How this could happen? What the cities can do, and what the EU should do to have a better cooperation with the cities in the EU to perform better when it comes to climate action?
Very good question, and I don't know the answer, though, as you said, Budapest is part of many different global and European city alliances, which are really helpful in terms of sharing experience and, channeling best practices into Eastern Europe, which is actually dialing up even more our frustrations, as we are not able to implement those. I mean, there are obviously very low-cost actions and involving citizens and trying to find a consensus on how to construct a very nicely harmonizing and consequent climate strategy, but then it is very difficult to implement, as it would need at least 8 billion euros just to conform with our climate actions and do that 40% mitigation target as we set in our strategy. So 8 billion euro, we can't really imagine that it would come into this city under the auspice of the Fidesz government. What I'm kind of, looking at the picture of Budapest from the above, one thing what strikes you really is the absence of blue roofs. And this is the absence of solar panels on the roofs. And just to connect this idea to democracy, climate democracy, energy democracy, what we have seen in Germany is that, people got the support from the government to implement their own power station. And they had a very good yield on it yearly. So CDU and CSU voters implemented that project on their very roofs. And when the government wanted to take away that benefit from them, they said, hello, we have a vote here, and if you are not cautious enough, we are going to take away it and give it to another party. And this created a green, acknowledgement and notion in the German society, which is very important in Central Eastern Europe, because Germany managed to lower the cost of solar panels in whole Europe and the whole world. And so what we are trying to do actually, to do that in Budapest and to create that energy democracy also in Budapest, to generate our own power. And I believe that it would be not that much dependent on outside sources, because we can manage to do something with this. Just to give you one of the ideas we have to overtake the always the complaining what I should perform here about how we are not getting enough support from EU, either directly or indirectly through our government. But we can learn a lot from other cities on this, and learn how to really channel the very scarce and small resources what we have access to in these alliances, and hopefully we are going to be able to use those well enough.
Thank you very much. Our time, unfortunately, is over, so I would like to thank you for all of the panelists to be with us and to share your experiences and views. I would like to say thank you for the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, which hosted this panel, and which is a strategic partner for the whole event. And let's hope that the ongoing decision-making on the EU level on climate policy making and the coming COP26 will provide and deliver decisions and policies which help us to get closer to what we are talking about today. Thank you very much.